This time on the show, we're going to be talking some ZFS with Sean. He's been using it on FreeBSD at Groupon and has some interesting stories about how it saved his data. Answers to all your emails and all this week's headlines on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 95, Bitrot Group Therapy, recorded June 24th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Glad to have you guys with us. We got another exciting episode of BSD Now, lots of fun stuff to talk about, and let's get right into it, of course. But as we get started, we have some more BSD Can follow-up here.
Yes.
So as we had said this would happen, as of last week, there's already some more videos that are starting to show up online. So we have all the relevant links to, it looks like all these are up on YouTube, where you can grab those and watch and experience some of the talks that you didn't get to see if you weren't at BSD Can, or if you were there. There was, what, 4 tracks?
Yeah, there was
this year,
no way to see them all while you were there. So.
Yeah, so there, heck, I was there and I haven't seen any of these, so I need to go watch some of these too, right? But we have, first up, we have Alexander Moten did a feature-rich and fast SCSI target with CTL and ZFS.
Yes, I was there for that one. That was really good.
Cool, I need to go listen to that.
It talks about some of the iSCSI offload features that have been implemented for VMware and Microsoft Hyper-V, such that, if you're using your ZFS machine as the backing storage for your virtual machines, when you go into the VMware control panel or whatever and say, I want to clone this VM, with typical iSCSI, what you'd have to do is basically read the entire VM over iSCSI onto the controller machine, and then have it write it back to the destination, right, to the second file, and that's all over the network, so it's kind of slow. Whereas when you do with the iSCSI offload feature, you say, hey, ZFS machine, please copy all of this range of data to the second file, and it does it on localhost, not over the network. On your ZFS machine, that can be, a 10 times speed up on how long it takes to clone a VM that way.
Okay. Well, I might note here, too, that looks like Dan's on IRC, the organizer of BSD Can. He said no more new videos till after this next weekend at the earliest. So maybe we'll have something sometime after next week.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. I saw him tweet about that as well.
Yep. So next up, Dachi Goto did a FreeBSD for high-density servers talk, and the video for that's up. Ken Moore,
that was the one we were raving about in Japan, where we saw that machine with all the what do you call it there? It's like 48 Atom processors inside the one machine.
Like a little cluster inside of 1U. Or
it was a 2U.
I think it was a 1U.
It was a 2U with 48 separate Atom processors in it. So, it was great.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. But Ken, my brother, actually did a Lumina DE talk. So if you want to see the Lumina desktop, you can take a look at that. Kevin Bowling did a free BSD operations at Limelight Networks talk, which would be fascinating.
Yes, that one was very good. It kind of talks about the different orchestration stuff that they use to manage their giant set of servers.
Nice. And then I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name, but you want to take a stab at that, Alan? Macy Pasternak? Something or another. I'm sorry I butchered that, but talked about Jetpack, the container runtime plugin system for FreeBSD. And also Ray Percival did networking with OpenBSD in a virtualized environment. And then Rake Floater did OpenBSD's a new HTTPD. So we got talks on that. So we got a smattering of, looks like, FreeBSD talks and then a couple OpenBSD ones as well. So definitely lots of videos to keep you guys busy throughout the next week if you listen to them when you're commuting back and forth or need something to watch over the weekend. Actually, that kind of leads us into our next article here about the OpenBSD HTTPD rewrite support.
Yes. Somebody mentioned that if you watch the video for this, you can actually hear somebody asking about having rewrite support in the new HTTPD that's built into OpenBSD. And so
this is an example of why you go to conferences, because you ask the developer something and then he's like, we should do that. And the next thing you know, you got a patch like next
well,
week.
And in this particular case, Rake didn't want to use regular expressions because it's a huge amount of code and it's complicated, and you can end up creating recursion loops and doing denial of service attacks against it and all kinds of weird things. So he was like, I don't know what to do about this. Well, being at BSD Can, he also got to be around some of the other OpenBSD developers, and Ted Unangst gave him a hint. It was like, Lua has a pattern matching implementation, and it's about 700 lines of code, and it's MIT licensed. And so on the plane home, Rake grabbed a copy of that, wrote it to be how he wanted it, he applied the KNF, the style that OpenBSD does for their code, to it, and took out the Lua bindings and everything. And now there's actually a pattern matching engine that's small and compact and well licensed, built into HTTPD. But he says, no, this diff does not bring Lua into HTTPD. It's actually the C code that Lua uses to build its pattern matching thing.
We borrowed Lua, but just took the Lua out, and now it's perfect. Right?
And so it gives you an example of a rewrite match here. You can see it's slightly different than a regular expression, using a % instead of the escape character and a couple things. But in general, looks like you should be able to do most of the types of rewrites you would need to do in your web server in about the same way.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, so it looks like that has made it already into current. So if you have a snapshot or want to grab a snapshot of OpenBSD current, you can now start playing with that, testing it out, and give them some feedback. Let them know if you're on any issues with it.
There's a man page that explains how the pattern matching works, and then there's the pattern matching files and so on. And yes, like you just said, they was already been committed, because when Reg first posted his diff, he got some feedback and fixed quite a few important bugs before it even got committed, and thanks to the other OpenBSD developers that helped him with that.
Nice. Okay. Well, next up, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but two-factor authentication. So I'm doing this specifically on FreeBSD and over SSH, of course. So we have a cool article where it kind of sums up everything about that you need to know about authentication into your BSD boxes, using keys instead of passwords, whitelist IPs, or of course two-factor authentication. And so this article is going to go through a few of the different things. It touches a little bit on key pairs where you have a server-side password as well, and then of course Google Authenticator and related family of apps, and a few other variations on that. But the article talks about FreeBSD, but of course a lot of this you could apply to OpenBSD, Net, or any of the others as well. But definitely neat. I know it was really painless switching over to two-factor authentication here. I really liked it, so haven't gone back or regretted it since.
Well, the interesting one was at BSD Can was talking to George Neville Neal, and he's like, I didn't think that an Apple Watch would actually be that useful. But he uses Duo security, multi-factor SSH stuff. So every time he tries to do a commit or anything that SSH is in, he has to approve it from his phone. But he has it actually go to his watch, and he can just tap his watch and to accept the session, and then he doesn't have to pull out his phone.
Oh, that's nice. Like, just an easier way.
And it's like, well, that is kind of an interesting use case for something like an Apple Watch for doing your SSH multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll show up on some of the other digital watches here in the future. But yeah, I can see that definitely be a handy app where you don't need to have your little, key toggle or whatever anymore.
Yeah, well, that's the other one they brought up here. They mentioned OPI, one-time passwords and everything, which is a system I used to use during college because I didn't trust the computers in the computer labs at the college not to have a keylogger or something. And so that basically involved carrying around this little card in my wallet that had my next 40 passwords written out onto it, which obviously has security problems of its own. But I was saying, you can SSH into a different machine and get and use the tool there to generate those. How come we've never seen one of those for a phone? So you could open up the app on your phone, type in your master password and the number you need, and it would give you your next one-time password.
That could be interesting.
A way to do the Google two-factor authentication thing, but without having to rely on Google or some other one of these services. I got to look at
some Android developer needs to write that, or maybe it's already in the Google Play Store.
An Android implementation of OPI would be kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah.
I think OPI could use some updates. I think it uses MD5 to generate the passwords currently. It's many iterations or whatever, but you end up getting a bunch of these short 4-letter passwords or 4-letter words. So your password is like 6 4-letter words, which I'm sure relieves many sysadmins. I forget what the dictionary uses. They're not swear words, sadly, but I'm sure you could modify the dictionary to include those.
Right. Leet speak and all those options.
But yes, so this article goes on to talk about why this is required and how, sure, people are going to use a strong password on their SSH key most of the time. But the problem is, from a policy standpoint, you can't force them to do that. Your server doesn't know how well they protected the password that protects their key, or if they even did at all, and so on. And so forcing multi-factor from the server side is the only way you can be sure that your users are more
doing something halfway sane, right?
And it talks about your options of a server-side password, doing a password and an SSH key, both forced on the server side, or doing a server-side password and a Google Authenticator, or doing just an SSH key and a Google Authenticator, but they recommend against that and explain why, and lots of other different options you can do, including a public key, a password, and a Google Authenticator.
Wow, geez. Yeah, that would almost be too much trouble here.
Yeah,
but I don't
and
know.
then it talks about, well, it depends, what's the server got that you really need to protect?
Sure.
And maybe you wouldn't do that on every server, but there's one server that's, got the secret
that
keys
one,
for something, like has the signing certificate for your package repo or something. And then it talks about other stuff you need, like using fail to ban or deny host or something to block failed attempts, changing the SSH banner and so on, enforcing password length and complexity rules and stuff like that. Maybe looking at like port knocking and so on, although that's not very useful in multi-user environments. But anyway, it's a very good article, and I recommend people check it out.
Yeah. You should definitely read it if you run any kind of SSH system, facing the internet or facing any kind of public access. Yeah, definitely need to take a look at that. Okay, NetBSD has some fresh goodness. NetBSD 7.0 RC1 has been released. So this is our first release candidate for the 7.0 branch after the delay since the beta, which was, I guess, about 11 months ago now. But some of the new features in this RC1 include, of course, the improved KMS and DRM support. So they have modern GPUs working, SMP support on ARM, and, of course, a slew of new ARM boards, which are officially supported. GPT support in the installer. We got a Lua kernel scripting. We got multiprocessor USB stack, improvements to NPF, which is their new firewall. And then optionally, you can start playing with a Clang 361. So that's pretty neat. So yeah, a lot of new goodness, I guess, just from the beta to RC1. There's definitely a lot of stuff landed in there. But of course, they're looking for as much testing and user feedback as possible. So any NetBSD fans or users out there, go ahead and give it a spin. Try it out and let their release engineering team know. So if there's any problems, they can get them corrected real quick, and hopefully the official release won't take another 11 months.
But you gotta love the being NetBSD. They have this giant list of ARM boards. Although most of these are supported on quite a few operating systems now. But Pi2, Odroid, BeagleBone XM, BeagleBone Black, Banana Pi, QB Board 2, QB Truck, the Merry Hummingbird, the Marvel Armada XP, the Global Scale Mirabox, the Kobo, and the NetWalker PCZ1.
Yeah. Well, if you have any of those, that could be a great OS to throw up on them, see how it works.
And their installer has support for GPT now.
Yeah, that's pretty slick. Okay, well, that'll actually wrap it up here. So we're going to do our interview in a moment, which you guys will enjoy. But before we do get to that, we want to mention the first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean, and that's digitalocean.com, where you can go get signed up right now and use the coupon code FreeBSD. We had a guy email in this morning. He couldn't wait for the show because he wanted to know what the code was so he could sign up with it right away. But anyway, use that code. That'll give you $10 credit so that you can basically run a VM for a couple months on that. That's pretty slick.
And actually, most people don't know this, but you can apply the code after the fact. So if you signed up before you knew about our code, if you just go into your account, there's a button and you put in our code and you'll get your $10 anyway.
Nice, nice. So see, they reward you for being a customer already. So yeah, don't forget that. That's FreeBSD now, and of course you can now spin up FreeBSD in a VM on DigitalOcean. But there's methods for installing OpenBSD
Yeah,
as
we
well.
talked about that about a month or two ago.
Yeah, you'll have to
it's in our show
back
notes.
to whichever episode that was. But it's definitely in one of the show notes. But yeah, DigitalOcean just makes it super simple. They got data centers all over the world, great connectivity, great utility on the website, so you can test your connectivity.
Right, but also you get console access to the machine, and that's how you can manage to convert a FreeBSD instance into OpenBSD, is because you have access to the console. You can deal with stuff that you can't do over only SSH.
Nice. So yeah, DigitalOcean makes that super simple, and of course everything's backed by SSDs. It takes about less than a minute to get a new droplet spun up, so really no reason not to, guys. And at that price, come on. So anyway, they have a variety of options depending on how much disk space or CPUs, memory, transfer you need, bandwidth, etc. So go check out their site and see which solution will work best for you. But just don't forget to use FreeBSD now. And if you talk to those guys, tell them that you heard it here. We're joined now by Sean Chitenden, who's here with us as an architect from Groupon, and
thank you.
We have a lot of questions for you, so we're going to get right into them.
All right, should be good.
Let's do this.
All right.
So first of all, what we ask everyone, how'd you first get introduced to BSD?
Back in the late 90s, worked for an advertising company. We were running Linux, 2-something, and we had a couple of interesting problems that we encountered along the way. Notably, well, first off, at the time, we were doing hundreds of millions of unique IPs a day, very short-lived TCP connections.
Nice.
And everything was source-built and kind of cobbled together, and it worked really well for all intents and purposes, especially for like 98. But it was based off of BOA, and we had a Perl process and BOA would sit there and non-blocking I/O write a little text protocol over the name pipe to Perl, and our processes would hang and crash periodically. We couldn't ever really figure that out. And then with all these short-lived connections, performance kind of was an issue. Sure. And so my boss got frustrated with that, grabbed a Walnut Creek CD off of his desk one day, took off to the data center, came back, started bouncing all the boxes. And when they came back and he came back, all of our response times were down, things worked better because this bug just kind of magically went away. And that hooked me. And I was like, all right. So obviously got really familiar with that and have kept it in my toolbox ever since.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so you started with BSD quite a while ago. Have you been using it the entire time?
Basically, not entirely. I've used it ever since, on and off in various capacities. In the mid-2000s, I had a data center company, and we've had a reseller, and one of our customers was Penny Arcade. So they were like, at that point in time, I dropped out of the BSD community just because I was focusing on this company, but everything in the data center ran FreeBSD. So we did all of our hosting and everything in jails, or what you would now call a container. But yeah, so I've been using that on and off, done a bunch of interesting things with it along the way in terms of routers and firewalls and obviously databases and web servers. But yeah, it's been it's been interesting. So
was there any other cool things you did with BSD?
Plenty, but little's coming to mind right now. Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that was, an interesting lesson learned was FreeBSD has the union file system. So we had layered file systems, which at the time was really, really appealing because, like, hey, you're going to null FS or union mount something here. You're going to give a customer their own writable file system. And that ends up being a complexity nightmare after time. Like, so at this point in time, like, object or class hierarchies and class inheritance is kind of falling out of favor in the programming world. And at the same time, like, there's this emergence in layered file systems. It's basically the same concept. One of them's programming, the other one's system administration, but it's the same degree of complexity. So, history repeats and things ebb and flow, and let this one ride out.
So what makes FreeBSD in particular so compelling to you?
So it's this fantastic toolkit, right? There's lots of different things that you can do with it. You've got lots of problems that exist in the operations and productions world. Bitrot's one of them. Being able to debug a system, the observability, like, what is this black box of a computer doing? And, like, you have very good ways, like world-class ways of, like, poking into the internals of FreeBSD. dtrace comes from ZFS, right? Like these are the biggies. So, and the toolkit's small. Like right now we compile everything. It's like 100 megs total size for the base. I think that's with dtrace symbols and debug symbols. And then like Userland is like 300, 400 megs. It's that's tiny.
Nothing. Yeah.
It's tiny. It's like 10 seconds over on a giggy network.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool.
So why did you feel it was so important to make the case to use FreeBSD at Groupon?
So, yeah, hold on a second. I got a couple notes here because I got to... So, Groupon's a commerce company, right? Like, we sell things. Last year, very specifically, in the last 12 months, we did in the last 12 months, we did $6 billion worth in bookings, 160 million visitors. We sell things, right?
Yeah.
Like, this week I went and bought a meal there, and last week, or like not last week, but like in the week before, a similar story. In the future, I'm actually probably going to go and pick up another BSD laptop off of there.
Nice.
But, like, we sell things, right? That's our business, right? So we're in the business of making sure, as at the operations department, in making sure that we provide a reliable infrastructure, something that's predictable, because at the end of the day, when we sell stuff, that's our business, not, right? So we have to mitigate all of these various risks in order to provide this reliable environment. So if the problem there is potentially, let's say, Bitrot, which is a phenomenon that needs to be dealt with, there's a strategy for dealing with that, and ZFS on FreeBSD is a fantastic way of addressing that. The predictability you can figure out, and probability, you can figure some of these things out and watch this stuff using dtrace and some of the other observability tools I was mentioning. So it's where else are you going to get that?
That's true.
It's really hard to get something that's enterprise grade that will meet this criteria.
A neat package ready to go.
100 megs, there you go. Right, it's tiny.
Nice.
So yeah, but yeah. So I guess Bitrot or Bitrot, not Bitrot. Like this last week, Facebook had they released a white paper on SSD error rates. And this was fantastic, and I got a couple notes here just because I wanted to make sure I get these numbers right. But they here you go. So the correctable bit error rate varied anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 100 million. It's pretty high. And then the uncorrectable bit rate was 1 in 384 million. Like, and on the upper end, it was 1 in 19 billion. Right?
Okay.
These are significant. They seem significant, but like, these are real numbers when you're writing out terabytes worth of data a day. So how do you protect against this risk of bit rot, right? And there's lots of strategies for that, but like ZFS is phenomenal. And like that's what it does. That's its bread and butter. So there you go.
Nice. Okay. So what was the first thing switched over to FreeBSD kind of in a production role here?
So I guess, yes, the first thing that went to production was actually backups, right? We've got lots of data, need to back it up someplace. We want online storage for this so that we can access, and recover in the event of something. You got large amounts of data, and you need to protect it because you're holding on to it for extended periods of time. So if you've got lots of data that you're going to hold on to for an extended period of time, the probability of bit rot becomes pretty real. So how do you manage that risk? ZFS, right?
That's right.
Right. How do you manage the expiration of old data? You go through snapshots. Right. There's lots of ways of dealing with this, and so ZFS went into production for backups first. So,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And so you started using ZFS for backups, but ZFS is amazing and tends to creep into everything.
The ultimate firewall file system.
I want that feature. Yeah.
So how did ZFS creep into everything?
So before backups, we actually started with the database project. But because backups were an easier project to get out the door first, we got backups out the door first. But really, like the core and the thing that we actually cared about initially was the database, right? And how do we build like a next generation database tier that addresses these problems?
That makes sense.
Nobody wants bit rot in their database.
Yeah, I mean it's bad anywhere, but that's ridiculous.
Right? Like, how do you deal with a torn page? Like, not even a torn page, but like a corrupted bit in the middle of a page. Like, there's it's not pleasant.
And when it's e-commerce data, it's important that you don't screw that up.
For sure.
Right. Yeah,
So speaking of ZFS, it saved you. So tell us how that has happened.
Yeah, so I could talk about it briefly.
Okay.
So in operations, you expect a certain amount of failure.
Sure.
Right? And you like you have to put contingency plans in place and plan for the fact that there's going to be some kind of hardware failure. So I can talk about two things. Like one's just recent where zpool scrub came back and incremented and had a non-zero error count. You just kind of go, and you copy paste that and you go, hey, check it out. Right. Right. So because nothing happened there. ZFS detected it, corrected it, life moved on. There's a different story that I can tell that is a little bit more significant in the sense that we had in the first generation of test hardware when we were initially piloting everything out. Normally you would use an HBA and expose the individual disks to ZFS and make a zpool out of that. But when we first started, the hardware that we had was a RAID card, right? So we had to take the individual, create a bunch of RAID 0 volumes, expose those RAID 0 volumes to ZFS, right? Create a zpool out of that and move on. Well, in our automation framework, we started using our normal RAID monitoring utilities as well. So we're sitting there polling the RAID card. Hey, are you healthy? Doing that on a regular basis. There's a little firmware bug in there somewhere. And so we're sitting here polling, and all of a sudden, the RAID card stops responding to all I/O and starts emitting these messages back to the kernel saying, or the kernel starts emitting these messages saying like, I/O timeout on RAID card blah. Okay, that's a problem. So this happened to be a database, and we're like, okay, what are we going to do? No I/O is passing. Bounce the box. Hangs. Says, okay, there's no firmware here. I'm not firmware. There's no RAID labels on any of these disks. Okay, so get a little creative. Go in and pixie boot the box. Come back up. Get the RAID card get into an MFS root. Use MFI util and flash the firmware and update it because there had been an update. Bounce the box again, and now it recognizes 6 of the 8 disks, and you're like, great, but I'm still missing 2. So the RAID card support helped with getting a new label initialized. Fantastic. Bounce it again, and now we get all of our disks. Right? But this is where it got really spooky and really, ZFS really helped us out. Was because when the box came back up, it was able to start reading the data, but it started reading checksum errors, and ZFS was able to correct or detect and correct for this. So at this point in time, we realized that, we had, a hardware issue, but we were able to get all the data off of this system without doing anything extraordinary other than going through, trying to triage the hardware incident. It was the bomb that didn't go off. It was fantastic, right? And ZFS was really helpful in making that happen.
So it's amazing.
It saved me. I had to move disks from one RAID controller to a different one, which is usually impossible. And it was just delete metadata, create metadata, don't initialize the drive. The ZFS label is still there. And ZFS is just like, oh yeah, the disk just moved over here. Whatever.
I'm on a different host.
Right. I'm good.
-F. I'm done. So little stories like that. You start accumulating them, and you're just like, "This is enormous."
This is why we use the
storage is serious business. This is a fantastic way of addressing this. It makes your life so much easier, so much easier.
Definitely.
But our audience will definitely want to know, as you switch things over to FreeBSD, were there performance differences?
Yes. Everybody wants to know this.
All right.
So it's. Okay, there's by and large no performance difference, right? Let me just throw that out there.
The disk is only as fast as the disk is, right?
Right. So, I'm going to hand wave and say there's no performance difference, right? In truth, there actually has been, and that has more to do with being on slightly faster hardware in most cases, just because you're iterating and deploying something new, and so it's incrementally faster. But the important point there is the observability and the predictability, the reliability. That's what it is that you need to do. It doesn't matter if it's fast if it's not correct. Right?
Yeah, true.
Most of our workload or time is actually spent in user space, right? Like in the case of Postgres, you got a billion rows that you need to sort. It's going to quick sort the same in Linux as it will in FreeBSD. There is some overhead from the kernel, by and large negligible in either direction, but for all, not really. We have had a couple of incidences where it's been 10%. There's again, I'm going to attribute that more to modern hardware.
Right.
But we have had a couple of situations where we actually did have a pretty significant architecture change, where we went from a Debian 3.2.2 or 3.2.20 tuned box running with a couple of Fusion IO cards. And then we switched over to FreeBSD SSD ZFS. And in that case, we did see about a 300% performance improvement.
Wow.
But that had more to do with the RAID mirroring on Linux for the Fusion IO cards. But the fact that in making this architectural change, we got this huge performance. You're not going to say no to that, right? Like that was fantastic, and the entire team was just like, we're doing that some more.
That's a good idea.
That was pretty cool.
Plus, you have the advantage of even if it isn't faster, you can tell why it isn't faster.
Well, right. So the ability to measure the VFS, the VOP layer, or so to measure the VOP latency for when you're doing read and write I/O through the VFS layer, and then also being able to measure the physical phys I/O requests. You've got tools to do that, right? And it's really easy, and you can pinpoint things down and say what's the latency, and what's the histogram? How does the latency distribution over a 1 second period of time? What's it look like for a given process? And you can trend this out, and you can see, hey, we got some slow I/O over here, but 90% of the I/O is here, and that'll skew an average. But if I know what min-max is on some of this stuff, and I can see where, you get that. That's
or it's only slow when this other thing is happening.
That's right.
Right, like where there's lock contention. You can dive into problems and figure this stuff out. And again, because you're monitoring this, and you can say, hey, TP99, we're having a read and response latency in n milliseconds, right? Or microseconds, actually, in our case. So, it's really important to be able to demonstrate and rely on that data.
So what's some of the ways you measure that to give you these numbers?
So in the case of most everything that we do is if we can, is through the base system utilities like GStat and IOStat and some of those.
Sure.
Those are really crude, but they work. They're effective indicators. Where possible, and where we can, it's appropriate, we will use dtrace to go and monitor and figure out these quantiles of read and write latency and actually get into it. That's very nice. I wish that some of that stuff was a little bit more native so that we could export actual histograms.
Sure.
We use Circonus, and so the ability to take this histogram and go and splat it out someplace and then go and get a heat map that shows the I/O over time and the distribution of heat over time, of I/O latencies over time, that would be fantastic. But we don't have that, in the base system. That requires work. So
we're trying to add more stuff to the base system tools to make it easier to extract that data in a format that's easier to automatically process and generate stuff from.
Well, right, so that's at the operating system. When you get into the actual application layers, we use the standard stuff, right? Like MySQL, you look at the performance schema, and Postgres will go and look at PGStat statements and kind of extrapolate out how the application's performing. But by and large, we don't see any real significant difference. So that's just want to get that out there.
So clearly FreeBSD and ZFS are great, and everybody wants to use those. But what other technologies from FreeBSD do you use?
Snapshots. Lots of snapshots. Love snapshots. IPFW firewalls. Those are obviously built in and pretty standard. Let me see. Jelly for disk encryption. We really like Podre port build. We do that custom. We've got our own little tweaks and mods.
Your knobs.
Building Postgres with dtrace. Right. This is now going to be out of the box, I think, by the time this hits the air. We were talking to Port Manager yesterday, and that's going to be the default. So, really like that. When OpenSSL vulnerability the day comes out, it takes us 40 minutes to go and recompile the world, and that's fantastic. So that's really important for our ability to respond to incidents or to other external things that are kind of outside of our control. That's really, really important to us. So
that's cool.
So
So when you started adding FreeBSD as your supported operating system, what were some of the issues that weren't as pleasant to deal with?
So when we get into Userland, we're golden, right? That's easy. But that's the trick. Once you get to Userland, getting to Userland is kind of problematic in the sense that it's work, right? It's not hard work. It's not impossible, but it's just... It takes time. It takes a little effort.
Everybody shouldn't have to do it themselves. We really should have some stuff for it.
So, somebody's got to carry that burden when you bring it into the... And we had an existing infrastructure in place that supports our current environment, and there weren't incompatible technologies, but it was really easy for us to maintain our existing environment.
Sure.
And we had to kind of build this parallel environment in order to support this new technology stack. Absolutely worth the investment. It wasn't a huge investment, but it was an investment, right? And it was, you know, if I could wave a wand, and like, it was more of an investment than I would have liked to see the organization make, but it didn't take long for us to pay that back. It was like, right? Like, you do this once and you're kind of good to go. Yeah, the bootstrapping environment and the Podre and the build world environment, you get those three together and you're basically,
everything's
I don't want to say you're done, but like the cost of administration after that just plummets. Right? You can do a full build.
Everything's automated now.
So full world, full ports. And you spend like an hour a month or 2 hours a month, and like, that's not bad, right?
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Especially for the size and complexity that the BSD project is. I mean, it's 100 megs all said and done, but like, there's a lot of history and a lot of value there that as an organization you can leverage, and you know, you get that in about 2 hours of maintenance. And
that's not bad.
That's cool.
So how did you get the rest of your team that was used to Linux over to FreeBSD?
Database administrators, when we were first kind of starting this out and like, you know, testing the waters to see what this migration would look like for a lot of people, because we had a lot of Linux only admins or people that were historically just Linux only. Took us about 30 minutes of an instruction video, just kind of like, or like not instruction video, but like, you know, video conference. And we're like, okay, this is what it looks like to log in. Here's your accounts. Here's the handful of like, you know, basic administrative stats. Go. Right?
Postgres is Postgres.
Right. Like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like, here's how you get in. These are like the basic, you know, IO types things that, or like system subcomponents that you're going to need to figure out how to like administer and double check and monitor or whatever. But sink or swim, hit the man page, right? Like, man this. Like, that was actually probably most of that video conference.
Right.
And then, you know, we documented a handful of things since then. We just, you know, not that long ago, we brought in Drew from IX Systems, who everybody's probably familiar with.
Yep.
And she came in and gave an operations tutorial, or BSD for Linux administrators, and that was fantastic. Like, by and large, everybody loved that.
She does great tutorials, presentations, stuff.
Big. Like, I'm very happy that Rich, one of our director of operations, was able to put that together for us, because people just hadn't seen ZFS really. Like, on the database team, we'd been taking advantage of it. That was great, but like having that exposure kind of begin to spread, it was one of the better parts of of the quarter for most people.
So, nice.
ZFS takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around, but once you do, you're like, why isn't everything this easy?
Well, you start getting creative, like, wow, we can do this and that. And like, things that just were out of reach before just become so trivial now.
See, you can take a snapshot, you can test something, and then roll back, and it's like, takes seconds, and you just kind of go, wait, that was it? This is a change in your workflow. Like, this is basically life changing.
It's like, we have a dev environment, and we need a copy of the production database to work on. Snapshot, clone. Oh, there it is. You can change it, whatever, and we just throw it away and we're done.
Right. Like, it's ampersand and semicolons with a snapshot somewhere, and they're like, stop database, take a snapshot, clone it over here, start database, right? Like, seconds. Like, snapshots are free to take. Like, they don't pause your I/O.
It's quite nice.
Right? It's a non-blocking operation. It's fantastic.
So when you guys were in this conversion, so what are some of the things that ended up surprising you or turned out maybe to be a non-issue?
So BSD has dtrace, but not dtrace by default. Right? Like, when we first started, I don't even think CTF frames were in the kernel by default at the time. Like, they were commented out, or
they were just disabled in the generic, I think,
right, or something like that, right? So you just get, so that's surprising. Like, that's really useful, but it was disabled, right? Okay, ports, right? Like, we started working with MySQL and Postgres to get those to be dtrace enabled, but Podre, turns out, like, there's just some stuff that we needed to go through, right? And so that really kind of surprised. There was
pull some levers and flip some switches so that you kind of got the product you needed, right?
That's exactly like. It works when you do make, but it doesn't do Podre, and you kind of like, what's going on? Like, okay, fine. So we get it all figured out. Collation. This actually could kind of bit us. Not like in testing. Collation in terms of UTF-8 sorting on Linux versus FreeBSD, they actually sort UTF-8 differently. So, like, in the case of Postgres, we ran into a situation where we were replicating from Linux to FreeBSD, and the indexes are not binary compatible. right?
Oh, okay.
So when you use C locale, yeah, you're fine, but UTF-8 you're not. So that surprised us. We're like, select 0 rows. What the hell's going on?
Right.
So that really surprised us because I actually thought UTF-8 is UTF-8 is UTF-8, and it turns out it's not. Like the sorting on the boundaries there is a little different, which means that it sorts to a B-tree a little differently. And you go, okay.
Interesting.
So that surprised, but like live and learn. You can deal with that.
Sure.
Yeah. So how much work is it to actually support FreeBSD at huge scale like that?
Once you get everything up and running, it's not bad. Like it really, we spend relatively little amount of time dealing with the care and feeding. Like the amount of work, the work associated with doing work is like in maintaining this is quite low.
Sure.
So that's
which is what you want. That's like you say, you're not an IT company where you're here to.
We want to sell things, right? Like we want to be able to sell things effectively, and maintaining some of this stuff is important, but it's not core to our business, right? Like transaction, So once we got that up and running, not a big deal. We were pretty much good to go.
So what about the FreeBSD release model? Do you need the ABI and API stability, and how do you track FreeBSD?
So we do everything on stable. So we do everything on stable. We build ports and world together, and we release. We have a normal kind of cadence there that we do that with. We're contemplating tracking current and potentially moving to a more aggressive release schedule there off of current, potentially, in order to dog food some of that stuff a little bit more aggressively. Like we're now in the day and age where failover and failback there's by and large automated processes. And certainly that's getting easier. Some of the test frameworks like the BSD ATF and some of the other test suites that are out there have done a pretty good job of hardening things. It's not perfect by any stretch, but
it's not 2001 again. Like it's
that's exactly it. Like it used to be that you let things settle and shake out on stable, but then you potentially have to go and look at the last 2 years worth of release notes to go and figure out if and where there's a regression, and that's a huge amount of work, right? You used to always avoid the .0 release. I mean, just in general for all software. But tracking something that's closer to head takes some work. I don't know. It's something that we're looking at doing. We haven't, obviously have not committed to doing it. But
so we started rolling current images for PCBSD. And it's like you're going to pay the piper one way or another, but we've found it's easier to do it in little bites. We do it monthly, right?
Yeah. At the developer summit here earlier in the week, companies like a bunch of other companies are talking about, we've made the mistake of, picking up FreeBSD release, building our product on it, and then 5 years later, we have to forklift up to a much newer version.
And that's a huge
deal. If we had at least tracked head in our development stuff, we would amortize that big cost over time, and it makes it easier.
Yeah, so I think that that's extraordinarily compelling, right? So I think we're going to do something similar to that, where if our time horizon or our memory for like what's going into current is like bounded to 2 weeks or like a month, that's significantly easier.
Well, plus you can get developer attention still too, because they're still working on the thing.
It's fresh in their mind, right? They don't have to context switch to like, oh my god, what was he doing 9 months ago?
Right. You go figure it out. Let me know if you have a patch or something, right?
That was over the Christmas break, and I went to the holidays with family.
I've moved on. I have a new job now.
Right. Yeah, I can't talk about that patch.
So we saw, for example, HashiCorp announced Vault from your office. So obviously tools are important for managing a data center. So tell us a little bit about some of the tools you're using to manage infrastructure, and in particular, are there anything missing now?
So HashiCorp's a pretty exciting up-and-coming company. I'm happy to talk about a couple of these things. Large-scale data centers. Randy Bias actually has a great quote that it sums up the transition that's happened over the last few years quite well, which is in the server world, we used to have named pets, and now we have cattle, right?
Sure.
It used to be a thing to have a server naming convencon, right? I remember the company was used matrix characters, so like Neo and Morpheus.
Right.
There weren't numbers. There weren't numbers at the end of all of these, servers and hosts until you hit the web tier, and then it was like, but we've gone to numbered systems where even UUIDs for servers is kind of an acceptable thing. Okay, great. Moving on. And
mine went from the NATO phonetic alphabet to country code -- airport code -- lots of numbers.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that transition has happened because of tooling. In particular, HashiCorp's got some interesting tools that they've basically built for this kind of modern data center. So, like, console as a partition-aware control and coordination plane is really, really important for enabling some of this, transition from single-digit, not even single-digit, but just like, named servers to numbered servers, that kind of mentality. That's significant, right? Like, it used to be that your unit of care was a single server, and now your unit of care is like an entire data center. So when you're doing things on the data center scale, and that you have this distributed computer, which is a data center now, and then you think in that context, you need distributed tools like this. So console's a really interesting one because of the way that it was built. The fact that it's layered on top of surf and some of these other like failure detection mechanisms is significant. So so that's one. We use Ansible for configuration management. Let's see what else. Console though, like I just like the ability for systems and processes to self-heal at machine time versus human time is really significant when you're dealing with large, tens or hundreds of thousands, right? Like you just need to do something that addresses those problems at that scale.
So, are there any tools still that you're looking for or lacking in that space?
The ability to do on the distributed side of things, there's some, I'm sure, but the ability to emit histogram type, like going from averages to histograms consistently, right? That's something that you can get out of dtrace, and you kind of can't anywhere else. But I wish that the native tools like UCL, right? Like let's export stats via UCL or something like that, so that we can have like histogrammed information. That would be really nice, because that would be really nice. The ability to do like dtrace or like a flame graph, taking Brendan Gregg's work with regards to flame graphs, go and get a stack trace, or not stack trace, but go and get a call stack graph there, and convert that over to a dtrace flame or to a flame graph, and have that kind of built into the systems. You can be like, what's going on with my CPU, and have that kind of tooling built in, so that we've built this stuff, but why do we have to build it? And it's not that so some of this stuff is hopefully going to make its way out, but at the same time, this should be built in. Right? Like this is really high value
ports
stuff
first, and then maybe move it in farther.
So that kind of leads into our next question: what can FreeBSD as a project do to make it easier for organizations like Groupon to adopt FreeBSD?
It would have been really nice if in an afternoon, like some administrator could have sat down with like a BSD article, do these 10 steps, and poof, you're off to the races in an enterprise environment. Like, you have to have more familiarity with the product than you kind of would normally like. It should be that it's install this to get your Pixie environment, install this to go and get like your build environment going, install Podre, but it should be like really formulaic. That would be would have been helpful up front. Just because it's time and it's friction, and when a new organization who doesn't have familiarity with the project tries to start using it, there's differences, and you have to somehow mitigate that friction. So that would be a biggie. Programmatic, like the stuff that you're working on with regards to being able to programmatically query and
right?
Today.
But it's like your last point. We've said before that FreeBSD is kind of like a set of Lego you can use to build whatever you need. So you buy the set of Lego, and there's this Death Star on the outside. But if you don't have a little sheet inside that tells you what you put
what
together,
the blueprint is, that's exactly it.
Then all you have is a bunch of Lego. Right?
It's yes.
If you don't know the color code by heart,
this is one of so. People ask about Linux and BSD and whatever. It's the equivalent to going from like a Mercedes to BMW or BMW back to Mercedes. It's 6 1 half done another. But there are little differences along the way, and you need the blueprint to figure out, or the way of how do I program the radio here? Like there's a handful of differences that are kind of not significant, but it just the interface there, the human interface is just slightly different enough that it adds up to be something. So. You need the dashboard or the glove department, glove box manual for how to do some of this stuff. So
what are some of the Userland applications you're running on FreeBSD?
So we're definitely using Postgres and MySQL. Beyond that, we're looking at other technologies, but I can't comment about that at this point in time. So,
okay. So what would you like to be running on FreeBSD?
I think it would be good if the community at large had more documentation with regards to using some of the quote unquote big data type technologies like Hadoop and HDFS. Like, I'm aware of companies that are doing this, right? But they have the expertise to go and pull this off, and it's not really documented anywhere. And so that mindshare familiarity is not there, and I think that those kind of things would be significant for and because that would help adoption elsewhere.
Yeah, it's something the BSD community is kind of bad at. Is there are lots of people doing this stuff, but they don't talk about it, and we don't build up that repository of shared knowledge. Here, a bunch of people are doing Hadoop on FreeBSD. It's easy. You just do this. And it's like,
if only there was a show that did tutorials on stuff like that, right? but yeah.
So about that, are you taking show suggestions?
We do take show suggestions.
There you go. Yes.
TJ, check your inbox. There's going to be some stuff
coming soon to a show near you. Bug these guys. Yeah.
So, what are some of the barriers to getting these things?
People, time, resources, priorities. It's the usual suspects, right? Like, it's not, by and large, not a technical thing. It's just everything else.
Sure.
Lifetime. All I need is some time to work on it, but there's all these other things that got to get done first.
Right.
So, you're here at BSDCan. Yes. So you're hearing about all kinds of stuff happening at BSD. So what are some of the interesting things about the future that you see on the horizon that is...
I saw some really neat stuff and heard some really neat stuff yesterday. I'm not going to name drop because I'm going to probably say the wrong person's name. But somebody pulled down a CentOS 6 image and was running it on a CentOS 6 Docker container on BSD, right? Like Linux 64-bit binaries on native, like OS virtualization, but for not just FreeBSD native binaries. That's pretty significant. That's pretty significant. Again, like the programmatic querying and some of the stuff that you're working on is really interesting. The ability to like remotely orchestrate and manipulate FreeBSD is that
was cool.
That's significant.
Definitely.
So.
Yeah. And did you see the one about Cloud API?
I missed that one. Later this afternoon, there's Jetpack. I'm very excited to see what's going on there. Some of the stuff that's going on with IOCage. Obviously, very, very keen on what's going on and the development of that as time rolls on. So, it's exciting times right now. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we're seeing, as the conferences have grown and more people are showing up, more companies are showing up.
The BSDCan and the Developer Summit here were both bigger than ever.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so we've reached the end of our questions, but this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and we really appreciate you taking the time while we're here in Canada.
Thank you for having me on. It's been fun to be able to talk about some of what we've been working on for a while and breaking that trend of being a company that's been able to cherry pick all these things from the BSD project and actually use it and then talk about it in some capacity. So it'd be nice if more companies did this because it certainly would be beneficial to everybody.
See, the challenges put out there.
That's right. Like, not just company, but the community as a whole would benefit from this.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And please send those suggestions for tutorials in. Maybe we'll surprise you with something interesting down the road.
Open JDK.
Right.
With dtrace patches.
There you go. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And stay tuned for more.
Okay, now, I hope you guys enjoyed the interview, but first up, we got our news roundup now, so it's time to get into that. But of course, we want to mention the other sponsor before we do so, which is going to be IX Systems, and the URL for that's going to be ixsystems.com/BSDnow, where if you haven't checked out what they got up there and seen their new site and all that, you really should. Do yourself a favor. If you have any kind of hardware you're looking at, or you're in a business that uses servers or needs workstations or little FreeNAS minis, even for your house, IX Systems has got you covered. There's all kinds of stuff they can do for you there. So, Alan, do we have any new news? Are you ordering anything
I'm
new
still
yet?
working on it. It's almost perfect now. It takes a bit more back and forth because, there were a lot of questions I didn't know the answer to, and they helped me work through that. It was like, you know, which hard drives do I want to put in this server? It's like, well, they make 8 terabyte drives, but people haven't used those very much. We don't know how good they are. So the 6 terabyte ones are also slightly less per gigabyte. So let's use those and somehow fit more of them in the server. And, you know, going back and forth. And looks like getting one with 36 of those HDST helium-filled 6 terabyte SAS drives. So that was a different build for me. And then, you know, went back and forth on, it's like, well, they have the Ivy Bridge versus the Haswell Xeons now, the V2 versus the V3s. It's like, well, the V3s mean you have to have DDR4 RAM, and that's more expensive. But the processor has 10 cores instead of 8. Or even instead of, 10 cores instead of 8. And it's like, And then it's like, well, sometimes that's better. And sometimes it's like, well, for video transcoding, that seems like it would be pretty good.
Sure.
And so,
more cores makes you happier.
And it's like, well, let's see what the price difference is and decide if it's worth it. And so, but that's the big thing, is that you kind of tell them what you're going to be using the machine for, and they can really help you make the right decisions. It's like, even as far as, you know, which SSDs to use. It's like, well, I know I want enterprise grade SSDs, but there's like the kind of SSD you want to use for the operating system doesn't need to be as expensive. And then there's the kind you want for a read cache, like an L2 ARC, and then the kind you want for a write cache for like your ZIL. And then it's like, well, the ZIL doesn't need to be very big, you know, usually, you know, even barely into the double digits of gigabytes, and so on. And it's like, you know, I don't know the answers to all these things, but IX does, and that's why I shop there.
Yeah, because they've done a lot of them. Hey, so is this one going to be shipped directly to a data center for you?
It's going directly to a new data center. I don't think there are many places other than IX where I feel comfortable having them arrange the shipping directly to some place for me, just because, you know, the place I'm shipping it to has specific requirements about how the package is labeled so that they know it's for me. And then, you know, and they're like, well, we won't pay the customs fees and stuff and pass it on to you or something. You have to arrange to have that paid separately. And, you know, IX is the only place I've managed to get that done properly with before. And so I'm very happy to deal with them.
Nice. Well, we'll have to get them to take some pictures of your server before they ship it so we can see some of the new goodness that you have going into the data center. That way you can see it too, I suppose.
Otherwise, I have to arrange to go visit it.
All right. Well, that'll be cool. Well, again, guys, that's going to be ixsystems.com/BSD now, and let them take care of you as well as they're taking care of Alan, and get you set up with your next solution. Okay, so news roundup. First up, we have some Open SMTPD news and Dovecot. So we've, of course, talked a lot about Open SMTPD in previous episodes. We've created some guides, and each time we talk a little about something a little different than the last time. But this blog post has something we've not actually covered before with Open SMTPD, but that's virtual domains and virtual users.
Right, when you want to go beyond just having the users that actually exist on your server, having accounts at your server's host name, when you actually want to do, you know, your blog and a company site or a bunch of different email sites all at once. And so this actually covers how to do that with OpenSMTPD and Dovecot.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. And he even goes through like how to protect your daemon with PF and
how to set it up to use
Dovecot, IMAP.
How to use it with TLS so that all your email goes around encrypted.
Yeah, this is definitely a nice walkthrough, but yeah, if this is something you guys haven't set up yet, man, I'm meaning to. When I just don't have the time, but I need to switch over to OpenSMTPD at some point, right? Get off a postfix. But at the moment, it works, so I'm not gonna.
Yes, that's
not gonna poke the bear until I have the time to run away from it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good. I like that analogy.
There you go. So, but yeah, of course, this article will walk you through, like Alan said, setting up a bunch of domains there, and covers SSL certs and blocking spam, IMAP, and everything. And this could be a good time to test it out. So OpenSMTPD 571 RC1, which we're going to cover in more detail when it's released, and we'll have a link to that. So if you want to find out some more information about it.
Yeah, but if you want to...
let us know how it goes. So I'm particularly curious, if somebody out in the audience is also a postfix user and migrates over, do a write-up on it. I'd love to see it. That way I can cheat and read and see what you did and know what my pain points are going to be and get that all mapped out ahead of time. Right, I'll let you take the arrows first. So, that'll be great. Okay, next up, something I was excited to see this week, but a new Qt front end to package NG has showed up called OctoPackage. Yeah. So this is somebody I've been working with online, but a PCBSD users ported over a graphical package management utility from Arch Linux, which is called Octopi. And of course, it needed to have some rewriting done to make it work with FreeBSD's package system instead of Pacman. But he's done that now. We have a link to the GitHub repo where you can check that out. And there's some basic instructions on how you can go ahead and get it built and start running it on the GitHub page. And after it gets a little more testing, I'll probably actually make the port for it and just commit it to the FreeBSD ports tree, because this looks really cool. I've already played with it here, and it's pretty slick looking. Definitely power users in particular will make it very easy to go and manage a bunch of packages graphically.
Yeah, it's like when you know where the stuff is in the package tree and how to find it, an interface like this might be a little more, what you're looking for than the App Cafe.
Yeah. This is a little bit more fine-grained, right? You're dealing, delving right into the package database and able to get into all the nitty-gritty of stuff. So it definitely complements, something easier like the App Cafe with this is more for fine-grained and administrators.
Does it have an interface to let you play with like packages query command?
Yes, so it has like the searching interface and some of that, and it's able to query different things. You'll have to take a look at it at some point, or I'll get them to upload some screenshots.
Yeah, it's just because
if I get a chance,
something to let you build some of those crazy queries that thing can do would be really nice.
Yeah,
like, I want to know all the packages that might depend on this. Or
Yep. So, of course, this is going to make it easier for desktop users who are used to some things like this in Ubuntu or other Linux distros. That may help you switch over. And the cool thing is it'll just run on vanilla FreeBSD as well. So I'm definitely going to get it in the PCBSD tree so people can install it alongside our utils and use either or. But yeah, very cool. I was excited to see that land, and good job getting that ported over. Okay, next up we have AFL versus Mandoc, a quantitative analysis.
I'd like to see more stuff like this. This is definitely good stuff.
Well, it looks like Ingo Suarez has written a pretty good article about how he and the other OpenBSD devs have been fuzzing Mandoc with AFL. So this is pretty much accompanying material to the BSD CAN talk, which already covered 9 topics. But this is definitely a good way to read about it online if you haven't seen the talk yet, or if you want to follow up.
And Mandoc makes a lot of sense for this kind of fuzz testing because it's basically a parser. It's meant to read widely different possible sets of input and generate man pages out of them. And so there's lots of opportunity for interesting bugs.
Definitely.
And so the article actually walks through and breaks down 45 different bugs they found and what the root cause of them was. And so also, as a kind of novice programmer myself, it's interesting to go through these and kind of have an idea of some of the mistakes you should try to avoid making in the first place.
That's right. Yeah, this definitely is a good read. You should definitely take a look at it if you do any kind of development or programming. But that's fascinating. We definitely need more articles like this in the future. So if you want to know some of the secure coding practices used by the experts over in OpenBSD, that's a great way to get your feet wet. Okay, speaking of videos that we talked about earlier, we got another slew of videos have started showing up. But this one from the OpenZFS conference. So videos from the second OpenZFS conference that they did just started to show up online. We'll have some links to YouTube here where you can watch those. And, of course, the first one is by Matt Ahrens, which makes it immediately a must-watch. So you need to go check that out. But in this first video, he covers some of the ZFS history. Of course, the Oracle takeover, the birth of Illumos and OpenZFS. And then he starts walking through some of the usage administration basics and then new features that are being worked on.
Yeah, this is from the OpenZFS European Conference number 2, which took place in Paris, France in May. And so, yeah, I forgot that had happened. And so I really need to dig through a lot of that and see.
Well, also, there's a couple accompanying videos here, one from Nexenta and then HDST, talking about how they use and contribute to OpenZFS as well. So some other good information about ZFS there you can take a look at. Okay, time to get into the feedback and questions. But before we do want to mention our last sponsor for this week's episode, which is going to be Tarsnap. And the URL for that is tarsnap.com/BSDnow. And so as we wrap up the episode here, you could pretty much go on that site, get an account created, get signed up, put a few bucks in there, and start doing backups and get that all done, and just check that off, like done, backups finished, and they're in a good place, they're safe, they're secure. One of the things I liked was even the key that you have, Alan. He makes it printable, so like you can even go put it in the fireproof safe somewhere or give it to a friend or something.
Because without that key, there's no way to get your files. And Colin doesn't have the key, so he can't get it back for you either. That's
right. Yeah, I had to back up mine, both physical copies and digital, right? But yeah, you definitely want to hold on to that key, because that's a good thing. Like, it's scary, yes, that nobody can get your stuff back, but that's how it's supposed to be. Like, without the magic key, nothing comes back. So Tarsnap makes that super simple to do, makes it quick, and of course they have clients for just about everything under the sun out there. So hit up tarsnap.com and you can go ahead and start seeing what he has available. And if you don't trust the binaries up there, which, come on, if you're being really paranoid, why not? Then you can go ahead and download the source and build it from source yourself, so you know that what you compiled is exactly what it was supposed to be.
You can audit the code all day, and if you do find a problem, there's a bug bounty.
That's right. Consider that a challenge. So if you can find something, let them know and claim your prize.
Yes, the bug bounty is scalable to every kind of issue, so you can even point out typos in documentation or whatever and get paid.
That's right. So again, tarsnap.com/BSDnow. Let them know we sent you. Okay, first up this week, we have Bryson writes in with a question about embedded routers. He said, I'm trying to move as many of my Linux devices as possible to BSD. My current consumer-grade router runs DDWRT, but is it possible to have any of the BSDs running on this type of MIPS-based routing hardware? As far as I can tell, the only way to get a 3x3 MIMO of this type of MIPS, of 802.11ac, or the upcoming 4x4 Wave 2, is with recent consumer routers or expensive Wi-Fi APs, like the Ubiquiti Networks Unify AP, and I'm trying to make this as inexpensive as possible, understandably so. So he says, are there any BSD-based router OSs like the Linux-based DDWRT? Is it possible to install the BSDs on this type of hardware, and how do I even get started? The MIPS page on FreeBSD Wiki is kind of lacking. OpenBSD says it hasn't supported MIPS since 2.x, and Google and both have not helped me in finding examples of documentation like this. I was poking around the internet again trying to look for info on my big idea and realized that my Buffalo router CPU is actually a newer ARM A9-based Broadcom, not one of the older MIPS-based CPUs. So he says the next router he has is a Buffalo Air Station, which comes with the DDWRT NXT pre-installed. Thanks for the awesome show. So what was it you guys were loading on,
So we were
Alan,
using vanilla FreeBSD compiled on MIPS for certain MIPS processors. Specifically, the Atheros ones were supported. So there's a separate wiki for that stuff. It's actually on GitHub. It's FreeBSD-Wi-Fi-build under the FreeBSD project on GitHub. And it has the instructions and a list of supported models. If we just get GitHub... FreeBSD Wi-Fi build. It supports quite a few different models, including the Buffalo Air Station WZR HP 300. Which one did he have?
WXR HPD.
Yeah. So this is all for, I think these are mostly the MIPS-based ones, so the ARM-based one he has won't be listed here probably. But there's a bunch of different Atheros boards, D-Links, some TP-Links, including the TP-Link WDR 3600 and 4300, which are the ones that we did at BSDCan.
Nice. How much do those run?
The BSDCan ones were $60, and that does 300 megabits of N at 2.4 gigahertz and 300 megabits of N at 5 gigahertz. Or the 4300 has a third antenna, so one's for 2.4 and the other two antennas do the 5 gigahertz. But those ones don't support AC, those devices. There is a newer device they have that supports AC, but FreeBSD isn't running on it yet. I don't know the status of that. But so there are a big list of supported boards here. Including... You
got your roll that you're showing there?
List of Atheros, Ubiquiti, TP-Link, D-Link, Carambola, Alpha Networks, Buffalo Networks, and Ingenious that are supported. And that list is growing. But for AC, I'm not sure what the status of that is.
Sure. Okay. Well, at least to get started, there's a lot of inexpensive options out there.
So there are quite a few devices, and most of those also support DDWRT. So anything that supports DDWRT has a good chance of supporting FreeBSD. But they're, just because it runs one doesn't mean it'll run the other. So
okay.
Yeah. There are quite a few devices, and more and more people getting interested in that. It was very nice to see the giant spike in interest caused at BSDCan by me bringing 20 of those routers to the conference. I think that definitely made a difference, and
that's cool.
That will hopefully lead to more of this type of thing happening.
Okay.
All right. So,
well, next up, we have Kevin here, who asks about dual booting. He says, hey, I'm an IT student from Finland. I've been watching BSD now for kind of a long time. I love always to learn more about BSD systems. I would also like to run FreeBSD on my laptop. Hardware is a dual boot, and Debian system as desktop mostly because it seems FreeBSD and ATI don't fit well together. It used to be in the past. It's actually gotten better.
Yeah.
But he says, I've been searching for guides on how to make dual boot with FreeBSD and Debian, but all guides I've found are either in Spanish, bad quality, or totally off topic. Could you please explain how to dual boot FreeBSD and Debian, and maybe give information as to how FreeBSD supports ATI video cards? So I think, what was it, 10.0 when that stuff started landing, the newer ATI drivers, or 10, I think it was 10.1.
Yeah.
But grab 10.1. The newer ATI cards work pretty darn well out of box. Personally, I'm more of an NVIDIA fan myself.
Well, for a long time it was, NVIDIA because they had the driver, but now that AMD cards are supported by the KMS framework or whatever, it seems like that should mostly just work for you.
Yeah. The newer ones I've tried have just worked out of box. Like I haven't done anything. Just plug it in and it goes. So, but he's asking in particular about how to dual boot.
Yeah.
So, sounds like you said laptop here. So it just depends on how you got the system set up. So if you've got it set up already pre-partitioned, just set aside another, if your MBR partition, set aside another primary partition that you can load FreeBSD onto. Then you can either set up a Debian's grub, I assume is what they're using to boot it. You can put an entry in there for FreeBSD. You could load FreeBSD first, use FreeBSD's bootloader. If you have two disks, that works pretty well, where you can just pick the other disk at boot prompt. PCBSD also uses grub, so you could potentially load PCBSD on it, use rgrub, and then just add an entry for Debian to that. So I've got a couple systems set up here with SteamOS that's dual booted on two disks, and PCBSD will just detect it and throw an entry in the grub menu for that automatically. So that's a possibility. I guess if you run into any problems with it, send us more information about your particular setup, because it depends completely on if you're GPT, MBR, how many disks you got, and all that stuff to give you a more definitive answer on how you should make this work.
But most likely, if you do FreeBSD first, then add the Debian, and then Debians will either pick up FreeBSD in its grub menu, or you'll have to manually add it after. But that's probably the safest option, because FreeBSD likes to plaster its bootloader over top of everything. And
that's right. So a pseudonym in the chat channel here asks about working with grub2 or OS Prober doesn't necessarily detect BSD. So yeah, that can be true. If you're using the grub from Linux, it may not detect the BSD partition. So in PCBSD, we've had to go the other way. We basically had to rewrite all the OS detection because none of that stuff worked on BSD. It all expected Linux device names and whatnot. And so ours will do the opposite. It'll, of course, add the FreeBSD/PCBSD partition, and then it'll look for Linux partitions and add those entries as well. It works best if you have full disk setups, because it can just chain load into the disk and do its thing. But it'll also try to chain load into the partition or load the Linux directly there. And it even works with EFI. So if you have a UEFI setup or whatever, it'll find the other EFI blobs and throw those in the menu as well. So you can choose to boot those as well.
Nice.
But yeah, use the BSD version of grub. May give you a little better success rate there. Okay. Well, that's actually all the questions we had this week for feedback. So thank you guys for sending that in. And of course, if you guys have questions out in the audience, you need to send those in to us so we can answer them for you. And that's going to be at feedback@bsdnow.tv. And that's pretty much the only place we monitor. So try and send all the feedback you really want us to answer or read on the show there.
Yes, please.
Of course, if you find stories or YouTube videos or other conferences, if you know of some upcoming bug meetings or whatever that you'd like mentioned on the show, send it in there as well so we can mention it on a future episode of BSD Now and give you guys a little plug, get more people out to attend your bug or your conference or whatnot. We're always happy to talk about that, and it's exciting to see when new ones show up. So thank you guys so much for being with us on the show today. Hope you guys really enjoyed the interview. I know we had a lot of fun recording that with Sean, and hope you guys got a lot out of it.
Thanks thanks to Dan for arranging a private interview room for us. That may making interviews a lot easier than other conferences where we've been trying to find a place. Or I remember at EuroBSDCon being shooed out of a room we were using because they were trying to lock up the building. And
no, it worked good. We got the executive suite this time.
It was very nice.
The glass walls and everything. Very nice. So, yes, thank you, Dan, for making that happen. It definitely is going to show. We got some good interviews this year. So I hope you guys will enjoy all those. And we'll look forward to talking at you at the same time next week on BSD Now.